Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Holmes to my Watson, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
Today we are talking about the Tarrasque.
A lot of you will be familiar with the Tarrasque from D&D, but it is actually a historical monster, like a one from myth of sort of a medieval origin, specifically medieval France, I believe. And Provence, France. And this was a dragon-like creature that I think is hilariously described as basically having a lion's head, a turtle's body, 6 bear-like legs, and a lizard tail, which is that is half Gamera, half lion, and I think that's great. But it was terrorizing the region of Provence until a woman by the name of Martha, later known as Saint Martha, would actually basically just give it a talking to and explain that God is real and that you should not be evil. And she converts the Tarrasque monster and it just leaves. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Bye. And then, she doesn't kill it or anything. She just talks to it, convinces it to leave, and it buggers off, which I think is a great legend. That's how more things should end. But I think for our audience, it's going to be more culturally relevant as a D&D creature, in which it is, the original was 1 R, the D&D creature is 2 Rs, Tarrasque. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how it exists in D&D, Zach? So
the Tarrasque is sort of, I feel like it's the culmination of an arms race between players and DMs. It's kind of the original unkillable monster in D&D.
Yeah.
Where going forward, a lot of characters players would be built specifically to deal with the Tarrasque in mind. It sort of became a little side project or mini hobby for some players.
Yeah.
But anyways, the Tarrasque is basically a 50-foot tall kaiju-like monster, reptilian in nature. There's only one of them on the planet, and it's wakes up every 1,000 years or so to wreak havoc on the countryside. It gets several attacks around, all of them nearly instantly lethal. And the early versions had some decapitation mechanics built into its attacks. And later versions would have a swallow whole mechanic where the creature would just instantly devour your character.
Right.
The Tarrasque was said to be immune to most magic and actually reflected spells back at you if you use certain spell types on it.
And didn't it have a stupidly high regeneration rate at a time when regeneration wasn't a thing?
Yeah, it had an unstoppable regeneration. So no matter how low you brought it in health, some part of it would be able to regenerate.
Right. Wolverine style.
Early versions would have it would take a wish or miracle spell to. It was only under certain conditions that the wish or miracle would even work.
Yeah.
And then there was a chance the spell resistance would still work on it. There was just a whole lot of just DM fiat involved. And
yeah, it seems like it's every piece of DM bullshit that you can get piled into one creature, right?
Yeah. Later on, the bestiaries and whatnot would just specify, there's no known way of killing this thing.
Right.
So some of the interesting things, though, at least in the earlier editions, they would state the amount of treasure you could mine from its body if you were able or lucky enough to kill it. Yeah. Things like thousands of gems could be harvested from its gut. Its hide and scales could be forged into +5 weapons and armor.
Yeah.
And with it being able to be killed, it kind of brings an interesting, or with it being able to regenerate, I should say.
Yeah.
It brings a kind of an interesting aspect of if there was a nation out there that could subjugate the Tarrasque, bring it low, restrain it somehow, and then just harvest it for those powerful magic items and whatnot.
Yeah. And just meat. I mean, you could never, nobody would ever go hungry again if you can just supply them with Tarrasque steaks.
And as long as those Tarrasque steaks don't regenerate inside of you, I guess.
We have to answer the question then of if it's a single entity that regenerates itself or if every part of it can regenerate into a Tarrasque. Because I think if it's it's got a core that from which the regeneration can happen, you could cut off its arm and its arm would be not then grow into a second Tarrasque, because then you end up with more than one, right? So I think that would be okay.
Unless maybe just all parts of its body are always trying to unify. So
Oh, ew. Okay, so this is an idea that we can definitely do something with.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the idea of just a creature that is stupidly hard to kill and like uncontrollably regenerating and rejects almost all kinds of magic and stuff. Well, I think the big question is why? What is it that has caused this thing to happen? Right? Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of the character from the online serial Worm, the Crawler, where this was just a dude whose superpower was if ever he is hit with damage, he regenerates and is now immune to whatever it was that hit him before. Mm-hmm. And by the time that the viewer sees him, he's like this 6-legged giant monstrosity dragon that is completely immune to almost everything because the guy has gone and sought out all of these things to hurt himself so that he could become immune to all of them. And it takes seriously...
It's literally the embodiment of anything that doesn't kill me makes me stronger.
Yeah. And I like that implementation a lot, but I guess we're not going to rip off Worm wholesale here. We can be creative on our own. So what's the origin? Let's sort of start from the origin and work towards our target, right?
Okay.
Are we talking about is this the avatar of a god or its favored creature or?
If you want to go with the sort of retroactively prescribed origin of the Tarrasque, there was basically a super hostile planet somewhere out in the Spelljammer system.
Okay.
That the Tarrasque probably originated from, where there were hundreds of these things on this planet.
Right.
And there's lots of lizard-like life on this planet.
Okay.
But that doesn't really give us a whole lot to work with there.
Yeah. This sort of would imply sort of like a natural evolution or something like that. And I'm not sure that I'm totally here for that idea. Mostly because I'm thinking of, I love the idea that there is only ever one Tarrasque on a planet. Or wherever you are, there's just one thing. It's not like a species. It's just a thing that exists. Mm-hmm. And that sort of singularity of it, I think is kind of cool. It makes it special. It's not just one instance of a larger species, that instead it is something that was created to be unique. And I like that.
What if, this is a little kind of out there, but what if the Tarrasque is like the heart of a planet?
Okay. So it's so wait, is it the heart of another planet or is it the heart of the planet you're on?
The planet you're on.
Okay.
Each planet, it's like a planet seed or something, or the core manifestation of this planet, or how the planet interacts with the inhabitants it has.
Okay. Oh, interesting. So if you're living in harmony with your planet, then the Tarrasque is friendly.
Yeah, it's a beneficial thing.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, I'm reminded of Moana, where you take the heart out of the god and she turns into the demon.
Oh, yeah.
I like that. Just a manifestation of the planet as a whole. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the reason you can't kill the Tarrasque is because it is the planet. And maybe that's more of a warning rather than you can't actually kill it. Don't kill the Tarrasque or you kill the planet kind of thing.
Or you have it as the Tarrasque itself as a manifestation of the power of the planet, and you could kill it, but it would involve killing the planet. Attacking the Tarrasque directly doesn't have any effect because this is the projection of the planet's power.
Yeah.
As opposed to it itself is just it's like a summoned creature in a way. It's something that the planet creates, and you could destroy it, but doing so would involve killing the planet, going into its core and breaking it apart, or flooding it with toxins or something like that, where you have to actually attack the planet itself in order to attack this creature.
And I also kind of like the idea that it makes dealing with the Tarrasque not the main issue. The Tarrasque is a symptom of the problem. So if you're trying to make amends to the planet somehow, that's how you pacify the Tarrasque rather than destroying it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so does that mean that the Tarrasque's physical form changes? Is it something that can be wildly different from planet to planet, or even from relationship to it'll appear as a horrible monster to somebody who is not treating the planet well, but it'll appear as a lovely, beautiful creature if you are in harmony with the planet? Would that be different, or does it have something more sustained?
Going back to that kind of that adaptation idea, I like the idea of it kind of developing an exterior and appearance designed to the task it needs, kind of, or designed to address a problem at hand.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, sorry, I got distracted by thinking about the possible etymology of the word Tarrasque, where you could have it like terroir or terra, and pulling, you might have to change the spelling a little bit, but it actually like pull it back into the idea of it being of the planet, terra.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's kind of a cool angle to take.
Yeah, I'm thinking like maybe this is because it's a created creature. It's a manufactured element that the planet puts out. It's like, it doesn't, like if two people were looking at it at the same time, they're always going to see there is a physical creature there, right? And it really just matters what the planet needs to have happen. Like why it creates the Tarrasque in the first place is what form it creates. So if it needs to go to war with the inhabitants on its surface, then it creates this giant kaiju and attacks people. But if it needs to just interface and talk to people, then it creates a man-sized entity that can speak and talk and like interact with the people. And so it like each Tarrasque that forms is formed specifically for tasks. And then when its task is done, that's how the defeat of the Tarrasque actually happens, is you just like whatever task it was created for happens, let it complete its journey.
And that also kind of goes to answer like why the Tarrasque isn't like just like this common thing you see, like you only see it every 1,000 years when it wakes from slumber, like, because that's like the time scale that the planet works on. Like,
right.
It's not going to have like an instant reaction to every little thing that happens.
Exactly. Something big has to happen that it has to put right. Something has, the rise of an empire or the creation of like pollutants or something like that, something that would like actually affect the planet as a whole. Or maybe it's also on a longer scale, it's also things that like aren't necessarily problems, but that they're things that the planet wants, quote unquote, wants to do. I guess we have sentient planets in this world. So
hey, I'm for it.
Yeah. So like planets have cycles of things like climate. You might call like mass extinction events, things that like are like part of the natural progression of the planet. And so maybe occasionally it creates something like the Tarrasque in order to instigate one of those changes, So it creates a Tarrasque that leads to an ice age. It creates a Tarrasque that ends the ice age. It creates a Tarrasque that starts to split the continents apart. Like it's the manifestation of the planets changing.
It's a planetary avatar, basically.
Yeah. And I love the idea of it being like literally like, okay, we need to start this whole continental drift thing. So it creates a big monster that literally like tears a continent apart.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Like with its hands. That's freaking sweet. And so when a Tarrasque appears in a story, it might be one of the two things. It might be like the planet dealing with a problem created by the humans on its surface, stamping out polluters or something like that. Or it could be like, this is the next ice age made manifest. And like, it has come here to create the change that is going to doom us all. So we're all going to end up fighting against it, but it's kind of futile because we're fighting the whole planet.
Interesting. I also kind of like the idea that maybe the planet isn't really all that bright, so it can only like replicate or respond to things that it's experienced.
Okay.
So like it would like base its Tarrasque designs on like animals that exist on the surface or inventions it's seen humans make, that kind of thing.
No, I like that a lot. So, you might see a dinosaur, a huge, like, and it can mess with things like material and scale because it's using like, it probably doesn't understand human scales very well. So like to it, a mountain-sized Tyrannosaurus Rex is basically the same size as a regular Tyrannosaurus Rex. Like it's as far as the planet's concerned, those things are the same size.
It's very small regardless.
Yeah, exactly. It's tiny. It's fine. And then also like when it makes a Tyrannosaurus, it makes one out of rock and lava because that is what it has to make things out of. Like that's the materials it's used to. It's not really super like into things like flesh because the planet as a whole doesn't really understand flesh. You'll manifest things in a much more elemental way made out of natural materials. I might extend that as far as maybe plants too. Like I think a planet would understand plants pretty well because like plants interface with its surface in a way that it's used to, but not like humans who walk around on its surface and don't interact with the planet itself as much. That's cool. And you could go pretty esoteric with it, like a living storm. might be a Tarrasque. You know, like a hurricane the size of a continent that like goes and wrecks the surface of the world. That could be really cool. And it's there, you know, maybe sometimes what it's there to do is very hard to figure out. Like, because it's coming from the motivations of a planet whose desires are very strange to humans. Scraping the surface of a continent with winds and torrential rains and stuff causes a bunch of erosion and things, and like creates plains that will exist 10 million years in the future. You know, it creates like it's like a long range plan that the humans are completely not part of and don't understand why their shit is being wrecked so heavily. It's because the planet that kind of doesn't really care.
Whereas for the planet's just kind of like, yeah, like it's just basically sticking something in the microwave and waiting. You know, I like that take on the Tarrasque. That kind of like makes me think of like how the canon Tarrasque in D&D is all reflective to magic and whatnot. Like, what would get a planet to the point where it decides it needs to be immune to magic in some way?
Ooh, well, I mean, like several settings, including things like Discworld, have dealt with the idea of like mage wars.
Oh yeah.
When magic users get powerful and start like flinging big spells around, it can cause a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. As evidenced by the wild mage I used to play back in that Pathfinder campaign we did for a while.
Oh yeah.
As a side note, that character was basically one excuse to roll on a D10,000 wild surge table as often as possible.
I still can't believe I agreed to go along with that as the DM.
I was cognizant enough that after a while I realized, oh, this is more disruptive than helpful. I'm going to switch characters.
It was still fun while it lasted, though.
But yeah, like if a character by screwing up a spell can do something as big as turn every gnome for several miles radius several feet taller, or rip a hole in reality, or cause the nearest star to explode, things like that, just by like screwing things up, then like magic itself could become a threat to the world itself. Or maybe it manifests a Tarrasque for some reason, like it makes like this is just a continental drift Tarrasque, like it was supposed to tear apart some continents. Mm-hmm. And it makes this huge Allosaurus or something with arms, and it, you know, shows up and it's the size of a couple of mountains, and it starts ripping apart a continent, and then the local wizards get their together, and they all come out and they cast a spell, and they manage to disperse the manifestation of the Tarrasque. And so the planet then has to create something specifically to counter them and says, I still need this job to be done. So I'm going to come back with something that just reflects all of their spells right back at them. Because now it's experienced them, it knows something about them.
That's a really cool idea, yeah.
Maybe occasionally on on a smaller scale, occasionally it sends out Tarrasques like specifically as a way to learn.
Oh, interesting.
You could imagine them as kind of a sense organ or scout, where it just is curious. Every once in a while it's got to check up on the maybe the planet doesn't have a lot of awareness of the surface. Mm-hmm. So it manifests a Tarrasque, which could take a lot of different forms, depending on what it's curious about. And it sends that thing out into the world, and it's not like necessarily hostile. Maybe it accidentally makes one that's huge, and you have to like deal with the fact that a kaiju is walking across your kingdom. But it's not like tearing things up deliberately. It's just like looking around and investigating. That could be pretty cool.
Yeah, or it's basically just like it's the equivalent of like, I'm bored. What's going on right now?
Yeah. What are you guys up to now? Oh, look, you made crossbows. That's interesting. I'll remember the crossbow idea for later.
Oh god, the crossbow Tarrasque is not good for anyone.
Actually, as I was thinking about that, the image of like the planet, like it doesn't necessarily have to pull from a single creature when it makes its Tarrasque. So it could do something like, and I'll admit that I'm stealing this next visual straight from Berserk, but like it could make a man sitting on the back of a deer and have the antlers of the deer be a giant bow that it like pulls out these, you know, arrows through and fires them off over the continent. And like it's all just melded together into one creature. So it's got like a guy, you know, back on its back. And its horns or antlers are these huge, like a recurve bow style thing. Mm-hmm. It really could manifest these in very strange ways, which would be really cool. I love the idea of it sort of melding and like swirling all of these ideas together in ways that seem very strange to us.
Yeah, but like it's the kind of thing that like it's what the planet sees as like the important part of it. Like if it sees like a man and a horse, and it's like, oh, it's a man horse. So, and it doesn't really realize that those two things can be separated, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. That it's we're seeing through the lens of the planet's perception. What other ways could it blend things together in interesting ways? I mean, like big bugs are really great. Just like a huge, like a millipede that's like the size of a train. That would be really cool. Yeah. And like burrowing through the ground with that, and like maybe at one end is like a face. Oh, better than a face. Like a graboid face. It's like a 3-jawed worm head. I love that.
Oh yeah.
And it's there to like, you know, maybe sometimes the jobs it has to do aren't like continent shifting. Sometimes they're just like big jobs that maybe are going to be important later. So like I'm thinking about like that millipede creature that burrows through the crust could live behind like rich veins of minerals and things like diamonds. Like the way that diamonds can be formed is that occasionally sometimes parts of the mantle get fired up through the crust. Like just a chunk of it kind of explodes and creates a vein of diamonds. Like as this piece of the mantle is thrust up through the crust, it makes a rich vein of these minerals. And so you can imagine the planet doing the same sort of thing on like oh crap, I should have done that a few million years ago. Let me just send out a Tarrasque real quick to get the same effect. And why it needs to have those things, why it wants those to have that vein of minerals there seems unimportant or seems inextricable to the people living on the surface, but it causes a lot of destruction. But then like, oh, hey, they just created a copper mine right next to our house, basically. And like, there's a whole new industry joining, that comes out from this.
Oh yeah. I also kind of love the idea of like a civilization becoming like technologically advanced in a world where the planet is alive and the Tarrasque is a thing. And like what does a Tarrasque feel about like humans discovering space travel, that kind of thing?
I don't know.
Like, and the possibility to communicate with other planets.
Ooh. I wonder if it would have, I don't know. Like, because my instinct is to say that like various planets have some sort of like other manifestation that they can communicate with each other with. But if they are truly alone and then the humans go off to the moon and come back and like, how would they communicate to the planet that the moon has its own, like, I don't know, like that communication, I'm not sure exactly how that would happen. Cause we're talking about like how its desires are inextricable, like it's hard to communicate.
Yeah. Like would a planet even care about other planets?
Oh, I feel like it's got to, right? I don't know. Something really lonely about a planet that like there are other versions of itself out there, but they never communicate is really sad. And like, I love the idea of them coming into contact for the first time because of something like this. Or maybe that's something it manifests a Tarrasque to do. Like occasionally it just creates a rocket and fires it at the moon, creates its own rocket, fires it at the moon. It lands on the surface, and then that Tarrasque acts as a packet of information that gets handed over to the other planet, and the two of them communicate that way.
Where the T in TCP/IP stands for Tarrasque. Yeah, exactly. And then like, well, I guess maybe that's like when it learns about the existence of rockets, that's when it like gets this idea. Whereas before it was having to, I don't know, fire asteroids out of volcanoes like cannons or something like that to get them into space. Which is kind of an awesome idea already.
Okay, so there is a real phenomenon where if a big enough asteroid or other projectile comet or something like that hits the surface of a planet, it can actually eject bits of the crust out into the world, out into space, which then fly around, and then sometimes those things come falling back down onto another planet. So like there are meteorites here on Earth that were originally the crust of Mars.
Oh, crazy.
Really, really bonkers. In fact, some of what we know about ancient Mars is from meteorites that we found here on Earth and were able to drill into and find little micro pockets of atmosphere and stuff like that. And they're very hard to keep from being contaminated. It's a whole deal, but it gives us...
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but it gives you like an unprecedented ability to learn about another planet. And maybe those little bits of the planet itself carry some part of its essence, its being, like the mind inside. And so occasionally with one of those pieces, like, you know, in this scenario, Earth and Mars have their own intelligence, right? And one of them gets ejected off into this, you know, gets a bit of it ejected off into space, which floats around for a few million years and then comes back down on the other planet. When that bit lands on the other planet, that little bit of the original planet's mind, so a little bit of Mars's mind would have fallen to Earth. And then when it impacted, kind of melded into Earth's mind. And then Earth now knows about Mars and knows that there's another mind out there that it can communicate with. And so then it starts developing the, like I said, the planets that fire, the volcanoes that fire planetoids into space to send little bits of itself literally over to Mars to communicate.
Interesting. So we got planetary memes now.
Yeah. Or
I kind of love the idea of that's how things like you get some really cool sci-fi ideas out of that, faster than light travel or something, maybe transferred by planets long before the inhabitants ever figure anything out.
Oh yeah,
about that.
Where the planet of an advanced race sends some of that information out to other solar systems. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. I'm down for that.
It'd also be kind of interesting, what if there was some kind of equivalent for stars or something?
Yeah, I don't foresee a reason for there to be we're getting a little bit closer to our Phoenix's idea, but
oh sure, yeah.
But yeah, I think that in this world, the Phoenix or in fact, maybe this is just part of the same cosmology.
Oh yeah.
Although at that point, I think the planets were eggs, and I don't think the egg has a mind inside it the same way that a living creature would.
Yeah, not quite so much.
But you could totally meld those if you wanted them.
I love the idea of a star evolving its Tarrasque or whatever into sunlight or something as its information delivery system.
And I'm also thinking about the mind that exists within this matter, within this, maybe also if that planet was broken apart, might sort of exist still as a distributed network amongst them. So you have a living asteroid belt, or one of the prevailing theories about the formation of the moon is that at some point early in Earth's formation, another planetoid hit Earth at a particular angle at a particular speed, and it flung off a chunk of the planet's mass, and that which then solidified and formed our moon. And so there might actually be sort of a resilient link between Earth and the moon, where they once were one, and so because they have that, they kind of have a latent ability to communicate with each other and to share knowledge, and so because they're part of the same system. And maybe that when they do their thing about transferring the rock between them, that builds a link over time that gets stronger and stronger. That the more they do that and transfer their matter between them, that it helps them maintain a connection over time. It not just does it send the information from one to the other, but it actually
interesting
starts to build a hive mind. I'm building us towards a hive mind is what I'm doing. Sorry.
Well, it was inevitable, wasn't it?
I realized what I was doing about halfway through, and I was like, well, okay, I'm just going to steer into it now. We're going to have a galaxy-wide hive mind. But you realize what that means is we can have a galaxy Tarrasque, a Tarrasque for the whole galaxy.
This is just the natural evolution of our player versus DM.
As much as bullshit as that idea is, this is the natural outgrowth of it. Yes, where you defeated the Tarrasque of the planet. Okay, well, the Tarrasque of the solar system's after you now. Oh, you defeated that? Okay, Tarrasque of the galaxy. Its arms are made of nebulae, and its head is made of supernovas, and it's just going to devour you.
Yes. And you deal with that, and we're going to go into the multiverse.
Yep.
Tarrasque idea I've got brewing.
Yeah, where its claws are infinite realities folded onto themselves like a single blade. I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew when we started this idea that we were going to go into some crazy cosmology, and I'm all for this. Yeah, well, and it makes sense because we're talking about the planets that were formed out of the same matter are sort of compatible with each other, and they maintain that connection. Well, all matter was created during the Big Bang. It's all innately connected originally. So it all has that sort of latent connection that could be formed over time as things got stronger. So I think that's pretty cool. And you could have living nebulae and stuff like that. I love that.
I also kind of like the idea that while the planet is doing like all it can to like kind of maintain its local reality, like its connection to these other planets. Maybe has it like, maybe it's aware of like the heat death of the universe or something, and like it's slowly working together with the other planets in the system to find a way to deal with that.
I think their answer is the big crunch. Like that's their solution.
Okay.
So yeah, there's the two theories, in case there's actually three, I think, technically, but there's two ideas, which is like, okay, the universe is expanding. What's going to happen in the future? Does it expand infinitely forever until we have what's called the heat death of the universe, where all energy is converted into heat and molecules become too far apart to interact with one another and everything just dies that way? Or are we going to have a point where everything starts to reverse and the universe is no longer is expanding, it's now contracting? And so maybe these sort of planetary and galactic intelligences that develop over time, they realize what's happening, which is that we're headed towards a heat death where everything keeps expanding forever. And their answer is, well, we all started together. We'd really like to be together as one again.
Sure, yeah.
So let's start figuring out a way to reverse the expansion of the universe. And
let's have our family reunion in the next couple trillion years sometime. We should really put that on the calendar.
we all just want to be one again. You know, we're all lonely. We'd like to be together again. By the way, I think the third option is that there is some sort of energy introduced into the system, which creates, basically the idea is that like we can keep expanding forever, but new things are going to be created in that expansion. If I recall, that's where the cosmological constant comes in, which Albert Einstein put in because he didn't like the way the math worked out on his I could be wrong about that. I probably am. I'm just remembering it off the top of my head. So all of this from Tarrasque.
It's just not monster mechanics if we just don't go entirely off the rails immediately.
Yeah, no, this is where we live. This is our home out here in the living nebulae, and the standing within the eye of Galactus, I guess, who is apparently a Tarrasque. We've now brought Marvel into this. That Galactus is just a galaxy-wide Tarrasque trying to remove problematic planets.
There you go.
So, let's scale back a little bit from this
Sure.
big wide thing and go back down to our lowly level. I'm thinking about I like the way this could manifest in other small planets and systems. Like you could have a moon Tarrasque, you could have an asteroid Tarrasque, you could have a nebulae Tarrasque, something like that. Yeah, like I like the idea of a moon Tarrasque. Something about that scene just kind of sounds right to me.
Oh, yeah.
Do you scale the Tarrasque to the size of the planet creating it? Like, could a moon Tarrasque really only be a certain size because it's coming from a smaller creature or from a smaller planetary body?
I'm not certain. Like, I feel like there doesn't necessarily have to be a correlation there because, as we were talking before, like it kind of develops it to suit the task needed.
And it may be just that the tasks it needs maybe aren't always as big, but that it could make a huge one if need be. I'm thinking of, there's the various interpretations of what the surface of the moon looks like to people in myth. So there's the man in the moon in Western myth, but like in Eastern myth, they talk about the rabbit in the moon. And so I can imagine like that actually being a thing that the surface people on the planet see occasionally, is that like as the moon is doing something, it manifests a Tarrasque big enough to be visible, or the effects of it to be visible by the naked eye.
So one of those volcano catapults just happened to launch some hapless rabbit to the moon. And the moon's like digesting this information, and like in the middle of this packet, there's just this rabbit carcass.
More seriously, the idea of rabbits, which the planet had realized about because it made a Tarrasque that saw a rabbit, and so it included that information when it next sent its next packet of information to
the planet. The planet was just going through its rabbit phase at that point.
Yeah, he was like, "Man, have you seen rabbits? They're fucking great. They're great. They're adorable. Look at these things." And so it sends one to the moon, and the moon's like, "Yeah, they are adorable. I'm going to make a giant rabbit." Can I say, though, that a fantasy world where there are people living on the moon is freaking sweet? I like that idea a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think they do it enough. I've not seen that in enough works where, like, you're on the surface of your planet looking up at the moon, and, like, when it's in a new moon phase, you can see the lights of the cities. That's freaking hot. I love that.
Yeah, that is a really cool idea and very strong visual.
Yeah. Like, I don't have a lot of praise for the EverQuest world, but that is one thing that they did right. I loved the fact that like at one point you just went to the moon.
Yeah. I feel like that is like That's always like a great like high level campaign plot is just send your characters to the moon.
Yeah. Or space for that matter. Like just that's again, it's no secret that I love Spelljammer. So like, you know, okay, let's go to we're done with this planet. Let's go to space now is a great move for me.
Yeah.
Let's see. What else can we cover on this? Well, okay, so we've talked a lot. We've built a whole cosmology here. So let's sort of try to bring it into how you might use this in some storytelling. We're obviously in an RPG world, so I guess we're going to be kind of framing it as though it was part of an RPG, like a campaign or something like that. Mm-hmm. What is like an adventure hook we could use for this? I mean, there's the really obvious. There's a monster rampaging through the countryside. How are you guys going to deal with it? Is there something else that's a little bit less obvious that we could do with this? Maybe they meet the like investigatory Tarrasque, and what would that encounter look like? Maybe.
I also feel like there's something to be said about like you could have like an entire campaign where they're just like kind of weird off the wall occurrences that are just unexplained until like you start like tying them together and realizing that like all these occurrences were manifestations of the Tarrasque in some form or another.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Like weird weather patterns or strange creature sightings, like your man, horse, crossbow.
Yeah. Or like you could use it as an explanation for a lot of like the myths and historical disasters and stuff like that. Like I was talking about the Tarrasque as a hurricane that takes over, that like ravages an entire continent. And that ends some giant civilization just as a happenstance. And you never explicitly mention that as a Tarrasque, but maybe it's something that your players could figure out as they're going along. They're like, oh, all of these like civilization-ending disasters are actually manifestations, the same phenomenon. They just take different forms because they need to accomplish different things. And so once you have that knowledge, maybe it's about like, okay, one of these is going to come again and we need to be ready for it. And we can't fight it. We have to like evacuate an entire continent. You know, that's kind of a fun task where it's instead of like, oh, let's kill the monster. It's okay, let's manage the logistics of like finding a place to put all these people and using our spells to get them out of harm's way and stuff like that.
I think another like kind of difficult thing to balance there is just the scale on which the events are happening, like where you've got, or at least from the planet's point of view, like it's not going to make sense to have multiple Tarrasque events like within the span of like a couple months or something.
No, it's got to be like over centuries, right?
Yeah, which good luck if you're trying to run a campaign like that.
Which is why I was talking about like it's you're putting together historical events where it's like, okay, these things were captured in on pottery shards, as we're like digging through the archaeological digs, figuring out what's going on. And like these things get passed down as legends, about the great Thunderbird and stuff like that like flew through the sky and like ravaged our civilization as it like created clouds or something like that.
On the other hand, for a very like this would be a really interesting way to run a campaign would be to like run a campaign over the course of thousands of years.
Oh, yeah.
If your players like elves or something like
or even just they're playing different characters over the course of thousands of years.
Sure.
You could do something along the lines of maybe your characters are like reincarnated, like they're living through life cycles where.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, you could come up with some rules together, which would be interesting. Like the first part of your each particular life cycle, like you live for X number of years before any of the memories of the old one comes back. And then over time, more and more of your old lives start coming back. And you could use that as a way to introduce like XP, basically, where you can like, instead of your character starting off and then like going on adventures to like get stronger, it's that they're remembering more of their past lives and more of that old character sheet sort of starts breaking its way back into your current one. And you have like the physical stats of your current body, but then also like the mental stats of all of the sort of overarching character that you're playing over and over again. And so like each session of your game is a new little one shot over the course of this long adventure. That's a cool. Yeah, that's pretty wild. I like that.
So I got another idea.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked about how like the end goal for these planets is like the big crunch or whatever. And maybe to deal with that, like these planets are learning like ways to manipulate time and space.
Okay.
So maybe one of the manifestations of the Tarrasque is like these portals backwards in time.
Oh yeah, because they're experimenting with ways to reverse.
And so
yeah.
So the players like get wrapped up in that aspect and like get sent back in time by accident and are able to see more and more of these things. Like maybe like suddenly every Tarrasque like retroactively becomes a time portal or something. So the player is able to experience every instance of like what the Tarrasque is by porting through these rips in time.
Yeah, yeah.
As the planet is trying to figure out how to send itself backwards.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, you could go some really weird angles with this. I like it. To be more simple about it, if they were just going to encounter just the one, and then you weren't going to turn this into a giant overarching. I mean, honestly, one of these things itself is a big enough threat to a civilization that you really only need the one to be a whole. Yeah, basically the central conflict of a whole arc. And so then instead of it being, again, like I said, instead of it being a scenario where it's let's fight this big monster, which you could go that route if you want. Although I like the idea of the central tenet that like if you defeat it, the planet's just going to send another one to accomplish the goal that it needs to have happen. So instead, the game becomes a sort of investigation where they're trying to figure out what it is that the planet's trying to accomplish, and then figure out either how to meet those requirements with less damage and less death all around, or to just like get people out of the way. Is an interesting non-conflict way to handle that. Like that's a different sort of puzzle to solve, which I like. Yeah. Well, I think we're coming up on 50 minutes, so I think we've hit peak Tarrasque here, and we've already gone to the end of space and back. So unless you've got anything else you want to cover.
Yeah. No, I think that far exceeded my expectations when we started talking about the Tarrasque.
Yeah, this is a much better version than that's in the D&D. The other D&D one doesn't have any like sense behind it, where like there's no reason for it to exist. It just does because the DM hates his players and wants to screw them over a little bit. This one's got a whole story behind it, which I like.
Yeah. Here's a very interesting vehicle to provide a memorable campaign or story for your players.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it for us then. Bye.
Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Monster Mechanics. We are still looking for listener questions, so if you've got anything you'd like us to talk about, hit us on Twitter at MonsterMPod or email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. Now for the credits. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated during this podcast are released under a Do What the F You Want public license.